Christmas is still ongoing and the new year looms before us. Continuing on from the traditions of yesteryear, let's have a look at the things I've been doing with my life. DIY hobby things, that is. Enjoy the rest of the intro. 2023 started strong. I wanted to learn new things, do a lot of things, knock out a steady pace of videos, thanks to a new camera. The first thing I learned, however, is that if you have a 1-year-old in the house, then they decide if you sleep, or even if you sleep, you love them above all else. But let's face it, you're not exactly curing cancer. Not that I could. These are just silly little projects that I've been playing around with in my basement, so enjoy! The first thing I did was build videos for the BulkyMIDI-32, simply because, as far as build videos go, this really needed to be one. Just don't go making a drinking game out of finding every time I said the word standoff. The design belongs to an earlier year, but I'm including it since it'll come up later. For what it does, it allows us vintage PC gamers to listen to Roland MT32 based MIDI music. Another returning project, this time in the form of a very different RetroPanel. Like before, it's a 3.5-inch drive bay module for using vintage AT motherboards with ATX cases. It includes power switch as well as a turbo switch. What's new is that I've tried to include a SD to IDE module onto it. Does it work? I don't know. I've tested it on my favorite non-MMX Pentium computer and it locks up. Because it's the same motherboard that I had in my teens, and that thing locks up as long as it even smells a disk that's larger than 528 megabytes. So I need another vintage system to do important testing, and you all support me buying yet another vintage system. I hope. My end goal for the RetroPanel is this thing. Yet another BulkyMIDI-32 variant in the form of a 3.5-inch drive bay module. As to how far I got before getting distracted, well, it's still this pile of blank PCBs. Do they work? Who knows? Stay tuned next year. Back by popular demand, meaning that all current occupants of the basement wanted one. Yet another Pi 1541, this time with a larger display and rotary encoder. Because I wanted it to match my C64G, I tried to paint it. Badly. I also did a horrible job at doing it. But it's mine. And you can't have it. You need to build your own. Everything's online, so you should be able to do that, if you want to. And so, we've come to this year's most inspired design. A simple tool to find a comfortable resistor value for an LED. Seriously, it lights up an LED. Sure. A datasheet will tell you the amount of current that will cause an LED to light up at its brightest. Or so I've been told, because where I shop there are no datasheets. Neither will they tell you what you would define as comfortable. So for every time I've put a power LED on the front of something and completely blinded myself, then this is my solution to that. You give it some voltage, preferably something that won't set the onboard regulator on fire. Move the jumpers around to set the resistor value, and you could, well, use different slots for something like an RGB LED. And there you have it. I managed to power an LED with a completely custom PCB design. A project that's been sitting in my storage since before COVID hit. I finally took the time to fix up what was so pleasantly named as a Japanese junk console, at least on the listing. Apparently that means that it had a broken case, smelled like cigarettes, and was incredibly dirty. In the end, I just donated the parts that was usable. The motherboard itself I put into a new case, and of course I went with purple as that was my original Gamecube. I made you a video at some later point as I had to region mod it and install one of those Pico Pis into it. Stay tuned for a video if I end up creating one. And now we've come to the part where I fell completely off the rails, simply because vintage computers and consoles have moved past what I can afford, in particular due to skyrocketing fees on just about anything that will need to be ordered from outside the country where I live. So, what is a nerdy individual supposed to do with that? Well, build RCs instead. I understand that this is not my regular content for this channel, so beyond this showcase, I'll probably be putting the content for that on a separate channel. My first project for getting into things was the first of what I expect to be many Tamiya kits, an Audi Quattro based on the TT02 chassis. Stay tuned for that on my second channel, sometime next year I guess. Speaking of RC cars, LEDs and custom electronics, the whole reason I got into this mess in the first place is that I wanted a better lighting system for one of my cars. Turned out that that's well outside my skill level when it comes to working with Arduinos, electronics and all that. So I spent half a decade building 8-bit computers, joysticks and generally try everything other than set the things on fire. Up until now, because, well, now I've actually built one. The design will of course need to be connected up to standard RC electronics such as a battery, ESC and a separate receiver. Where my design probably differs from most of them is that I wanted a separate output module in addition to the controller side of things. The reason is that the output will usually follow the RC body, while the controller sits on the chassis. And so I've managed to make it a step further this year, because now I've demonstrated the blinking of a single LED at a time. Of course, this is one of those cases where it's easier to say something than it is to actually do something. So that might just be me. And now I can hear you all practically shouting at the screen. Specifically that I should have done such a simple task with an ATtiny instead. And since I already had one in the form of a digistamp, I did exactly that. Well, almost that. Because this one only lights up a single RGB LED. The point of it is to sit inside one of these AliExpress exhaust pipes, adding a red glow on heavy throttle usage as well as some backfire effects and so on. Of course the RC exhaust design didn't just straight up work, and it's not exactly like you can easily debug an ATtiny like you would on Arduino, so I had to make one up with a screen. Along the way it sort of became a dead simple RC dashboard. Now I just need to design the PCB as well as figure out how to install it. And because I thought it would be easy, I built a module based on the MiniDexed hardware to fit along the BulkyMIDI-32. Though this is where I got stuck, because I'm not a music guy, and you probably need to be a music guy to understand how to use it. To put it into perspective, this is my keyboard. This is as far as I get. Anyway, the designs are out there if you find any use for it or not. Looking at last year's video, you just saved 2 minutes on account of me having more important things to do. Family things. I hope you found this interesting, because a lot of this will probably show up again in a more dedicated manner. As to next year, I hope it brings a lot of good things for all of us. So, Happy New Year!